In order to speed things up, I'm going to use the world object template. And as usual, I'm just going to delete pretty much everything inside of the looping animation block. And then in this block, we can just turn off the spinning. And it already has all these transformations applied because all this is already set up and super disorganized, but it is what it is. We can also delete the anchor, all these materials, and the manipulator ring. And actually, we can clean this project up a little more. Instead of using this, let's right-click and add a null. And then over here, instead of plugging these into the looping animation block, in the null, we can add the position patch, scale, and rotation. Plug all these in. Delete the looping animation block patches. And then also delete the entire looping animation block. And you saw that deleted this patch, which was adding values here. But because we don't have anything extra to add from this null, we can just skip over these add patches and delete those. And we're not using the little icon thing that comes with it, so we can delete this SDF. And then all these we can delete because they're no longer in use. So now we just have a much cleaner place to work with. We just have a single null that's tracked in place. And as we drag around, this should move along with it. So with that, we can also delete this looping animation block. So now we have a nice and clean scene. So I'm going to drag in the sand crater FBX that we exported. Right away, you can see that, and it actually brought with it the material that had the normal map applied. So you can actually already see everything in place. Now, of course, it put it deep inside this device. So we'll expand this, grab that and move it into the null object. And I'll rename this to position null. And this normal map is 1.5 megs by default. So instead of using Sparks compression, let's use Crushy. It actually looks like the JPEG here is only 400 kilobytes. So I wonder if we just drag this in again. Yeah, now it shows only 400, even though this one is 1.55. I don't know if Spark automatically converted it to a ping right away or what happened, but we can delete this one and instead use the one we dragged in. So we can turn off compression. I mean, it's pretty big, but we're only going to be using a couple objects here. Then in the material for the sand crater, under normal, we'll just toggle that on. So now we're back to our nice detailed mesh. Now to shade this, let's switch over to physically based. And metallic will stay at 0. Roughness will be probably all the way up. And then in environment, we'll turn that on and we'll grab something from the AR library. I bet sunrise or sunset would look good. Let's try both. Obviously, it's really bright because the color is just set to white. So let's take that and make it like a darker brown. So this is sunset. Let's try a sunrise. I think I like sunset. It's a little bit softer and not as harsh, so it makes our sand dunes look really nice. Now you can see the overall lighting seems to be really even. So let's turn off this directional light and this ambient light to see where we're at. So now we're only using the environment of this material for all of the lighting information. So the contrast is a lot better because this ambient light's not filling in all these shadows. And already it looks really nice. But of course we don't want this hard edge around the outside. So what we can actually do is use my trusty smoke or fog texture as an alpha matte for this whole thing. So I'll go grab that. And because we're using a physically based material, there's no dedicated alpha anywhere in here. So we need to add it into the texture. So we can right click and add a value, and this will be our general color. And then our alpha will come from this texture. And we just need to pack these together. And we'll switch to a vector 2. So it's not liking this, I think because this has an alpha as well. So let's swizzle this out and grab just the red, green, and blue channels. And then for this, we'll just grab the alpha and then plug that into the sand crater patch. So it looks like it's starting to work, but not quite yet. In the material, we need to switch from replace to alpha. So it looks like it's technically working, but it's a little intense. So what we can do is take the alpha from here and multiply it. Just plug that in. So now every time we multiply, it should kind of pull this down back out towards the edges more. And in doing so, we almost get this kind of nice like wet edge effect as this smoke alpha gets multiplied. And you can see some of these higher areas where we don't necessarily want to cut away is being cut away. So while this texture could work, I think it's almost a little too aggressive because we want these outer edges to be more filled in. So I'll just hop over to Affinity Photo and just draw out a nice quick little rough circle. Make a new document. 512 by 512 should be plenty. And I'll just take a brush that's a little bit rough, make a new layer, change the color to black just so I can see it out here. Make sure I'm in the paint tool, and then I can just kind of brush this out. So this nice rough circle should give us a nice rough alpha around our sand dunes. So I'll hit Control Shift Alt and S to export. We'll make sure it's a ping so we can get that alpha. Actually, to make this a smaller file size, if we go to Layer and add a fill layer underneath this and just make this white, then we can just export a grayscale image instead of having an alpha channel. So it can be a JPEG instead. So with that exported, I'll just drag it directly in. And I don't think we really need to compress this either. So now instead of using the alpha channel, which there is none, we need to grab the red, green, or blue channel. So we can just pull this out and swizzle it and just type R here for red. And the red channel should be exactly the same as the blue and the green channels. And now you can see the white is opaque and the black is transparent. So it's working, but we just need to flip it. And there's probably a number of ways to do this, but I think the simplest way is to multiply by -1 and then add 1. So we flip it into the negative, and then we add 1 to bring it back into the positive now with the values flipped. And there we go. So now we just have a nice rough edge around this outside to blend this into the ground. And we can change this multiplication value to make it more or less soft. So a value of 1 is exactly what the texture is. And then increasing that just kind of sharpens that out. We'll keep it at 1 for now and see how that looks in the real world when we test this. I'm going to take a second here and just organize my patches. Now let's add some sand particle emitters to make it look like it's a windy, sandy day. So first I'm going to rotate this just so the wind direction feels like it might be going from the right to the left here. Because these sides are a little bit softer, and then on the back side of those it's a little rougher. So it feels like the wind direction is going from right to left here. So in this position null, let's right click and add a particle system. And for this, we're going to add a few of these kind of similar emitters because we want to kind of choose these edges to emit from. So for the spray angle, we want to be 90 degrees or negative 90 degrees in the Z. And then the type will change to line. And it looks like the line is going left to right here. So I'm going to change the spray angle back to 0 on the Z. And then we can just lay this emitter down. So it looks like 90 degrees in the X. And then we can just rotate this around. And to make it more apparent, let's make this line longer and the birth rate a little bit bigger. Say 0.2 for the length and 50 for the birth rate. All right, let's just position this first and then continue adjusting the parameters. So this one will be along this edge. And because these emitters are going to be rotated differently, we might have to turn the speed to 0, but then change the force acceleration to change the direction that these are going. So it looks like -1 on the X. We'll push those along. This might be a little low. The particle life is looking short because we want these to flow quite a bit further. So in particle, we'll turn the lifespan to, say, 2. And the scale of these particles need to be much smaller. Let's try 0.001. And the lifespan maybe is a little too long. Let's try 1 second. In the tilt, we can change it to 999 in the randomness. And spin, we can change it to 100. These are going to be so small, though, that probably won't be able to see it, really. And now for the material of these, we want it to match the sand. So let's add a new material. Double-click it. Then rename it to matte sand particles. And we'll just use flat since we'll just set the color directly. And then in color, we can just pick a screen color up here. Now they blend in much nicer. And because we're only ever going to see this pretty far away, I think we can stay with these square particles. I think square particles might be the most efficient to render versus the cube or the spheres or any of those three-dimensional shapes. Now we have to consider, we'll be viewing this from fairly far away. I think most of the time, you can bring your phone close and get a little bit closer to it, but we want to make sure we'll be able to see these little particles. So we might need to increase them just a little bit, maybe 0.002. They're definitely unrealistically large, but at least you can see them. So now this emitter, we can make it as long as possible while still fitting on this ridge. And we can just line this up so it kind of fits right on there. Now if I hit Control-D to duplicate this, I'll just bring it over here. And changing to global space might make it easier to move this around. And I'll spin this until we line up with this ridge here. So now you can see we've got this area and this area covered. And obviously you can go totally crazy with this or keep it pretty subtle. I think I might just add 4 just to cover these general 4 different areas. There's that one, and then let's duplicate that once more and drag this over to this area. Now, because we're using a plane tracker, we need to account for the particle size when the user scales the scene up and down, because these particles don't scale along with it. So we can take the plane tracker scale and then multiply this by the screen pinch scale that comes out here. And then we'll add this to a sender and just call the sender scene scale. Now for each of these 4 emitters, we need to change the particle scale, and we want it to stay at 0.002. So we'll click that, drag all these out. Now we just need to take a receiver and grab the scene scale and then multiply that by this 0.002 value. And you can see it breaks spark because this is a vector 3. So we just need to take a swizzle, grab the x value, and then drop it in there. So now it's converted from a vector 3 to a scalar number. Now to make this scene more interactive, let's add one more emitter and have this be in the center here. I'll just take this one here and duplicate it. And I'll rename this to sand center, just to keep it organized. And I'll reset this position to 0, 0, 0. And I'll change this line type to 0.1 so it's nice and small. Actually, let's change it from a line to a plane. And then we'll reset the rotation to 0, 0, 0, just so the plane is flat and upright. And we're going to move this emitter down so it's pretty much flush with this ground. And so we need to increase the speed a little bit so that these particles go up and then over. It looks like 0.1 is pretty good. Then again, for the scale of these, we need to grab this patch and then just use this same setup here, just so the scale is correct as we scale the whole scene. So how we want this to work is if you tap on the sand dunes while using the filter, it will initiate these particles in the center. So we'll use an object tap. And then for the object, we need to grab the sand crater. And you can see the object tap makes a trigger. So we want to trigger an animation. And that animation we can have last maybe 0.1 second. And we want to quickly reverse this as well. So we'll add a delay patch here. And after 0.1 seconds, we'll reverse this. So it'll play forward for 0.1 second and then reverse back to 0. And then in this progress goes from 0 to 1. So we'll just add a multiply here. And then we can throw this into the birth rate of this particle emitter. And because this only goes from 0 to 1, we need to increase this to something pretty large, like 100. So now making sure a simulate touch is enabled here, if we tap on the sand dunes, you can see a little cluster of particles appear there. Might need to turn it up quite a bit. We could even turn up the duration just to have it last a little bit longer. And while increasing the duration, you also need to increase the delay. Otherwise, it'll just go in reverse really quickly. That's a cool effect, but I think if we go back into the emitter, and in the spray angle, let's turn up the randomness to 30 degrees in each axis. Maybe try 90 degrees. There we go. Now it looks like they're kind of being randomly shot out more. So starting from scratch, we built this really nice sand dune. We got a normal map generated and we optimized that mesh. Then we brought it into Spark, added these particle emitters to add a little extra texture, and then made it interactive by adding an object tap to initiate this little particle animation in the center.